I'll just say thank you for those of you who stayed with us on that. That was kind of rapid fire, and I appreciate it, the chance to do this for Lynn and Rand. And then COVID and other things stalled my trip. But I think we had the recording together, and it was covered in a compact way. So if any of you have any questions, or if you felt I left a big one out, were you waiting for a framework that should have been there? And that was, I guess, our big worry is a lot of these were my faves, and we had some arguments as to what should be in the list. But
So, Mark, I saw you unmute yourself. Do you have a question?
No, sorry.
It's okay. I'm just trying to be attentive to the screen of names that I have here as I look at y'all, and don't feel like you have to turn it on just because I said that. But if there was something that Zoom could fix, which is feedback, that would be awesome. So as Ralph says, we had minor discussions. The voices didn't get raised for the argument about how many, but we did start with something near 20. So there are a lot of interesting things out there.
well,
And we were talking earlier about that there were some lists online that we could see that people were putting together, but some of those were a little maybe outdated. Go ahead, Ralph.
I think someone else was about to chime in, but the other thing I would say that's been valuable to me anyway through the practice is watching member firms share how they've used these frameworks in their business at some of our member meetings.
Yeah.
Some incredible stories of how, it's one thing, these frameworks, they're cool and useful maybe, but we've seen some stories where actually firms have transformed themselves using some of these frameworks. And
That's a great pitch for the one that we have coming up later this afternoon, which is Marmon. They're going to share their story, and honestly, unless you've been through this transformation, and that generates lots of stories for yourself, you can't even appreciate sometimes how these things can really affect. Because the really best frameworks don't just touch marketing; the really best business frameworks are across the business, right? So, all right, I'm going to ask again. Does anybody want to pitch in?
You got a minute here, Lynn? I think we've got another, what are we?
We have exactly 9 minutes.
Okay, well, people probably need a 10-minute break before the next presenter to be candid. But there are many examples that have come up through our members that we're putting together now on how these firms have been used, how these frameworks, excuse me, have been used. Also, I guess as I look through this thing before we take a break, again, I thank you for sticking with this and for putting up with this presentation. It just reminded me of how constantly enthralled I am about what I have to say. So I'm sorry if I think I am guilty as sin of being very much in love with this practice and very much in love with these tools and seeing them in work and help people make money. I am guilty as charged. So you wind me up, I go on and on. I apologize for that. Okay, and I hope you found that valuable.
I think that a lot of us, that would be an interesting poll we should take, but I think a lot of us find the excitement in, can you be successful in some way, right? And your success usually measured in financial, but we all get excited when we can see a way to grow the market. And when you find a tool that works for you, it's amazing, right? So yeah, absolutely. Okay, so Robert Lange says, just to start it off here to you, Ralph. So this is a great collection of frameworks. What was number 11?
All right. Okay. Well, you asked, I guess, and I did some thinking about that, about this. Number 11 to me, it turned out to be a 2x2. But since you asked, let me see if I can pull it up here. I added, these were the ones I had. If you can see my screen, can you see it, Lynn?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, I had the targeting framework. We had perceptual maps, a very specific one, the behavioral timeline. I had some other ones. So number 11 to me was the targeting framework. And and that was one I was referring to because to me, that framework became much more, so targeting framework, there are many ways to do it where you put the segment attractiveness on one axis and your unique ability to compete, which is often the toughest thing to do on another. And this enables you to make decisions on which segments should we go after. And the big one on this for me was at one of our meetings, Timken shared this. This was a landmark presentation. We thank for Brian Berg and Phil Fracassa who presented. It was back in 2013. I don't know if any of you saw this, but Timken actually showed us this chart that had all of their customers on it, all of them. And on the left-hand side, the financial attractiveness of dealing with the customer, and on the vertical axis, on the horizontal axis, they polled their people on how well does our value proposition fit this customer. So they shared these data with us. I thought it was amazing, but these are all their customers. Obviously, they're anonymous. But it enabled them to really do some interesting thinking. This was, and by the way, this was a dialogue tool between marketing and sales. And this created real important dialogue between marketing and sales. Like, for example, look at the lower right hand of this chart. Here's a big customer in that little green ball where we're not making the cost of capital with this customer, and we have an excellent value proposition fit. What in hell is going on? And then over to the left, we got this big honking customer that's another kind of blue ball. But it's a big customer of ours, a poor value proposition fit, and we're not making any money. Why do we have this customer? So and by the way, they went through how they did this value proposition fit, and they had a regular taxonomy for this. By the way, this was all shared at the members meeting. Well, here's this same chart a few years later, back 2011, and you can see they've transformed the company using this. They actually, abandoned one market, put extra focus on others, had new places to target. So sometimes these frameworks are theory, and sometimes these frameworks are practice. And then they shared this with us. When they implemented this segmentation approach, they were in the pack with their peer set all the way through on financial performance. Once they had a few months to implement it, look at how they broke out. They were able to take this to the bottom line. So that's the one I left off. That was my number 11 since you got me started. So you asked, but that's one of the fun of coming to the meetings has been through the years is you actually get to see these frameworks put into action and produce results. And it was amazing to me that Timken was willing to be so self-revealing in showing this. But the Timken bubble chart has gone on to historical significance at ISBM in terms of, are you using these or are you just learning them? So,
yeah.
All right,
I really love that. I love the results chart, right?
Yeah,
I love the
great?
graphic that shows, how their performance just spread away. And of course, it takes a little time to get that momentum going and then running. But, when we had a question, the last presentation, how do I convince my management to do any of this stuff? How do I convince my management? I think it is if you can find a competitor's data that shows they're kicking your butt, that's what gets them, right? If I was competing against Timken, that would be how I get moving on segmentation, right?
Well, and another thing is that at meetings, that's one reason why friends are so important, I think, is that if you're bringing this forward, you can bring a tangible case like this forward and just say, well, yeah, I know it's a different market, but if you look at their customers, their selling cycle, the complexity of their offerings, it isn't all that different from ours. Again, growing up in the semiconductor business, I didn't think anyone had any business like semiconductors. And Laura Patterson and I have had this discussion a lot. Oh yeah, no one knows the trouble I've seen. I'm in the semiconductor business. But then, we get to work with people who are making bearings, chemicals, and other B2B things. We find that these cases transport very well. So encourage you all to learn from one another. I mean, these juicy cases are ways that you can begin convincing management. Well, are those folks really that much smarter than we are? Why can't we do that? Okay.
So you gave us a nice segue with data and analytics for me to introduce Andrew Peterson. So I'm gonna